warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udzubillahi min syururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala mudhillalah wa may yudlil fala hadiyalah. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh la nabiyya ba'dah. Alhamdulillah, pada kesempatan siang hari ini kita bisa bertatap muka secara virtual melalui aplikasi Zoom untuk bersama-sama nanti kita belajar tentang infrastructure, learning outcome, and financial issue in online learning. Jadi di sini sudah hadir pembicara dari Universitas Terbuka, Bapak Profesor Dr. Andes Ojad Darojat. Selamat datang Pak Ojad. Kemudian we also have a speaker from University of Hull, Paul Hopkins, and also Lynn Barrow. Good morning. Welcome to this webinar. Okay. Perkenalkan, saya di sini akan memandu acara. Nama saya Munajat Rimgroho. Kebetulan di sini sebagai Kepala Bidang Kerjasama Industri di Biro Kerjasama dan Urusan Internasional Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta. Untuk kegiatan pada kesempatan siang hari ini, acaranya adalah sebagai berikut. Untuk yang pertama nanti kita ada pembukaan, kemudian yang kedua adalah pembacaan ayat-ayat suci Al-Quran, kemudian kita lanjutkan acara yang ketiga, yaitu adalah pidato pembukaan dari Bapak Profesor Dr. Sofyan Anif selaku Rektor Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta. Kemudian akan dilanjutkan dengan presentasi dari Bapak Profesor Dr. Andes Ojad Darojat sekaligus sebagai Rektor Universitas Muhammadiyah Terbuka untuk seminar pertama. Kemudian dilanjutkan dengan presentasi dari joint presentation dari University of Hull. Kemudian nanti ada diskusi dan tanya jawab, dan kemudian di bagian akhir adalah penutup. Untuk seluruh peserta nanti akan diminta untuk mengisi presensi kehadiran. Adapun presensi kehadiran akan kita sampaikan ketika seluruh pembicara sudah menyampaikan materi. Jadi pada saat tanya jawab nanti akan kita berikan link untuk pengisian daftar hadir melalui chat. Jadi tolong nanti bisa dilihat di chat. Menginjak acara yang pertama adalah pembukaan. Marilah kita bersama-sama mengawali acara kegiatan pada kesempatan siang hari ini dengan membuka bersama dengan bacaan basmalah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Acara yang berikutnya adalah pembacaan ayat-ayat suci Al-Quran yang akan dibacakan oleh Saudara Zulfikri yang akan membacakan ayat Al-Quran surat Al-Hasyr ayat 18 sampai 24. Pada Saudara Zulfikri, waktu dan tempat saya persilakan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhalladzina amanu taqullaha wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat lighad wattaqullah innallaha khabirum bima ta'malun wala takunu kalladzina nasullaha fa'ansahum anfusahum ulaika humul fasiqun la yastawi ashabun nari wa ashabul jannah Ashabul jannati humul faizun. Lau anzalna hadzal qur'ana ala jabalin la ra'aitahu khashi'an mutasaddian min khasyatillah. Wa tilkal amsalu nadribuha linnas la'allahum yatafakkarun. Huwallahu alladzi la ilaha illahu alimul ghaibi wasyahadah huwar rahmanur rahim. Huwallahu alladzi la ilaha illahu al-malikul quddusus salamul mu'minul muhaiminul azizul jabbar al-azizul jabbarul mutakabbir. Subhanallahi amma yushrikun. Huwallahul khaliqul bari'ul musawwir. Lahul asma'ul husna. Yusabbihu lahu ma fis samawati wal ard. Wa huwal azizul hakim. Sadaqallahul azim. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Sadaqallahul azim. Semoga dengan bacaan ayat-ayat suci Al-Quran tadi kita bisa bersama-sama menjalani kegiatan hari ini dengan menjadi lebih baik lagi. Oke, jadi untuk kegiatan hari ini sebelum nanti mungkin Pak Rektor akan menyampaikan pidato pembuka, mungkin sedikit saya sampaikan bahwa webinar series ini adalah bagian kedua dari webinar yang diselenggarakan oleh Biro Kerjasama dan Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta. Jadi pada pertemuan yang pertama kita sudah membahas tentang bagaimana dampak COVID-19 terhadap pendidikan tinggi di Indonesia. Sedangkan untuk kesempatan kedua hari ini kita akan berbicara bagaimana kondisi infrastruktur dan kemudian terkait dengan capaian pembelajaran dan juga isu-isu yang terkaitan dengan keuangan pada pembelajaran secara daring atau pembelajaran secara online. Nah, kemudian untuk hal tersebut kami minta kepada Bapak Rektor Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta, Bapak Profesor Dr. Sofyan Anis MSI untuk bisa menyampaikan pidato pembuka. Monggo Pak Rektor.
Oke, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Innalhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawala. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh la nabiyya ba'dah. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajmain, amma ba'd. Yang kami hormati, yang pertama Bapak Profesor Ojat Darojat, ya. Beliau sahabat saya, beliau Rektor Universitas Terbuka, dan tampaknya kalau kita bicara tentang pembelajaran daring atau online learning ini, beliau sudah banyak makan garam, karena salah satu perguruan tinggi yang sudah lama sekali melakukan pembelajaran daring itu adalah Universitas Terbuka yang dipimpin oleh Pak Prof. Ojat ini. Selamat datang Pak Ojat. Mudah-mudahan nanti Bapak bisa memberikan pencerahan kepada kita semua dalam webinar kali ini. Kemudian yang kedua, special for Lynn Barrow and Paul Hopkins from University. Welcome this webinar. Thank you for your attention. Yeah. Thank you for your attention as speaker this webinar. I hope this webinar a success, and then you can provide great idea to this webinar. Bapak Ibu, para peserta webinar yang saya hormati, yang sudah mencapai lebih dari 200 ini ya, partisipan dimanapun berada. Yang pertama sudah barang tentu saya mengucapkan syukur alhamdulillah pada kesempatan siang ini kegiatan webinar untuk seri yang kedua ini telah kita laksanakan dan melibatkan para pakar yang di bidangnya, sesuai dengan bidangnya. Kalau seri pertama kita lebih banyak melihat dari aspek dampak ya yang terjadi pada masa pandemi COVID terhadap pendidikan tinggi. Maka untuk seri yang kedua ini kita lebih fokus pada infrastruktur, kemudian fokus kepada capaian pembelajaran, dan juga ini yang menjadi problem besar kita adalah terkait dengan pembiayaan pendidikan. Ketika kita memasuki masa yang begitu mendadak ya, dalam rangka untuk melakukan proses pembelajaran dengan sistem daring, maka sudah barang tentu ini memberikan banyak implikasi, terutama yang terkait dengan sarpras, kemudian terkait dengan infrastruktur, bahkan sampai kepada pembiayaan belajar. Nah, oleh karena itu, kehadiran para narasumber ini betul-betul kita harapkan memberikan satu ide-ide besar bagaimana sebagai satu tindak lanjut atau keberlanjutan pendidikan di perguruan tinggi ini dalam masa new normal. New normal memang kita pahami bukan berarti virus corona habis ya, tapi kita lebih kepada kondisi baru yang kita harus menyesuaikan dengan keadaan-keadaan sebagai akibat atau implikasi dari adanya pandemi virus corona ini. Ini sudah barang tentu menjadi hal yang sangat urgen karena sekarang ini kita sudah memasuki new normal, dan bagaimana kita mempersiapkan dari aspek infrastruktur, kemudian juga dari aspek metode-metode yang bisa kita kembangkan dalam rangka untuk mencari kompetensi yang menjadi capaian pembelajaran kita yang sudah kita susun dalam kurikulum masing-masing, yang sudah barang tentu ini harus terwujud, tidak terpengaruh oleh adanya indikasi yang terkait dengan pandemi COVID-19 ini. Sebagaimana kita ketahui bahwa pembelajaran daring yang selama ini sudah kita lakukan, ini seolah-olah kemarin memang menjadi satu gerakan nasional, bahkan mungkin dunia, bahkan di beberapa perguruan tinggi yang tidak familiar dengan metode daring ini sudah barang tentu ini akan menjadikan problem tersendiri. Di samping tidak siap, tetapi segala sesuatunya itu dilakukan dengan serba keterpaksaan. Ya, sehingga kita melihat dari berbagai evaluasi, bahkan evaluasi yang dilakukan oleh staf kepresidenan, saya sempat ikut mengikuti. Kalau dilihat dari tingkat keberhasilan pembelajaran daring yang lalu itu memang belum optimal ya, karena berbagai hal. Salah satunya memang tidak siapnya sarpras dan kemampuan dosen untuk mengajar dengan pendekatan daring itu juga belum dilengkapi dengan persiapan-persiapan yang menunjang pembelajaran daring yang sesungguhnya. Sehingga di samping belum siapnya modul, bahkan banyak juga yang belum melakukan tutorial. Ya. Bahkan juga kadang-kadang masih ada teman-teman dosen yang katanya daring tapi masih hanya menggunakan terbatas WA saja. Ya, ini yang kemudian akhirnya memberikan dampak terhadap mahasiswa yang melakukan evaluasi akan ketidakpuasan pembelajaran daring yang dilakukan oleh para dosen ini. Nah, inilah hari ini kita bahas, kita diskusikan persiapan-persiapan yang terkait dengan infrastruktur ya. Kalau di UMS sendiri memang sudah punya pengalaman karena UMS sudah mungkin 10 tahun lebih ini melakukan sertifikasi guru yang kemudian sekarang dilanjutkan dengan PPG. Nah, PPG, pendidikan profesi guru itu salah satu pendekatannya adalah dengan pendekatan pembelajaran daring. Sehingga memang sebagian besar teman-teman di UMS itu sudah familiar dengan melakukan pembelajaran daring. Tapi kita melihat secara nasional memang banyak perguruan tinggi yang belum siap. Nah, oleh karena itu sangat menjadi sangat penting webinar kali ini yang secara khusus nanti akan kita kaitkan di samping pembelajaran daring, tapi bagaimana dengan pembelajaran daring itu bisa mencapai capaian pembelajaran yang sudah menjadi profil kompetensi yang akan dibangun setiap perguruan tinggi, setiap prodi yang itu menjadi satu impian bersama, sehingga tidak akan berpengaruh apapun model yang kita lakukan termasuk dengan pembelajaran daring ini. Karena di beberapa tempat di perguruan tinggi di luar negeri atau bahkan di Indonesia pun itu beberapa perguruan tinggi yang sudah maju, maka pembelajaran daring ini sudah dimulai ya. Di UMS itu 20% pembelajaran setiap prodi itu sudah harus diminta untuk menggunakan daring. Nah, ini kita sedang membangun pusat pembelajaran daring, dan ketika pembelajaran daring ini diberlakukan menjadi fenomena nasional, maka Prof. Ojat itu yang Pak Rektor UT itu mendapatkan banyak permintaan bantuan, karena selama ini yang sudah melakukan, sudah merintis sejak lama distance learning dengan pembelajaran distance learning itu adalah dari UT itu. Maka sekali lagi saya ucapkan selamat para peserta dan terima kasih kepada para narasumber, Prof. Ojat, kemudian Lin Perro dan Paul Hopkins dari Universitas yang berkenan untuk ikut memberikan pencerahan dalam webinar kali ini, dan mudah-mudahan webinar kali ini sukses, lancar, dan membuahkan hasil-hasil yang bisa kita manfaatkan dalam rangka untuk pengembangan perguruan tinggi atau untuk keberlanjutan perguruan tinggi kita ini yang kita cintai di masing-masing dimanapun berada, sehingga akan lebih secara real akan memberikan kontribusi terhadap pembangunan pendidikan di Indonesia yang kita cintai ini. Saya rasa itu pengantar saya, dan terima kasih sekali lagi. Mohon maaf. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih saya ucapkan kepada Bapak Profesor Dr. Sofyan Anif yang sudah berkenan memberikan kata pengantar untuk kegiatan webinar pada kesempatan siang hari ini. Sudah bercerita bagaimana pengalaman UMS mengelola pembelajaran daring mungkin sudah hampir 10 tahun yang lalu. Kemudian sekarang akan dibuat sebuah pusat pembelajaran daring sehingga diharapkan nanti UMS bisa menjadi lebih baik. Dan hari ini kita juga sudah hadirkan narasumber yang sangat berkompeten, terutama yang sudah lama berkecimpung di dalam kegiatan pembelajaran daring. Yang pertama adalah Bapak Profesor Dr. Andes Ojat Darojat selaku Rektor Universitas Terbuka. Kemudian yang kedua nanti adalah joint presentation Paul Hopkins and Lin Perro from University of Health in United Kingdom. Untuk yang pertama nanti kita akan sampaikan dulu kesempatan kepada Bapak Profesor Dr. Andes Ojat Darojat. Tapi sebelum kepada beliau, terlebih dulu akan saya sampaikan kurikulum vitae beliau. Cuma kalau ini kurikulum vitae-nya mau dibaca semua, mungkin nanti kita malah tidak jadi mendengarkan beliau presentasi ini, karena sangat panjang. Jadi secara singkat, saya sampaikan bahwa nama Profesor Oja Darajat PhD, beliau adalah guru besar dalam bidang ilmu pengembangan kurikulum dan pembelajaran. Sangat tepat untuk hal ini kita mengundang beliau, dan juga sekaligus beliau adalah Rektor Universitas Terbuka dari tahun 2017 sampai tahun 2021. Pendidikan beliau itu sejak S1 itu sudah berkaitan dengan pendidikan, yaitu pendidikan dunia usaha. Beliau lulus dari Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia tahun 1990, kemudian beliau melanjutkan ke Latrobe University di Australia, kemudian dilanjutkan masih di Latrobe University untuk program magisternya, dan yang terakhir untuk pendidikan S3-nya beliau peroleh dari Simon Fraser University Kanada tahun 2013 yang membahas tentang kurikulum theory and implementation. Nah, untuk pembicara pertama Bapak Profesor Dr. Andes Oja Darajat, waktu saya persilahkan kurang lebih 30 menit untuk menyampaikan pemaparannya. Moga silakan Pak Ojat.
Baik, terima kasih Bapak Munajat. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Innal hamdalillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udzubillahi min syururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala hadiyalah asyhadu alla ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarikalah wa asyhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh la nabiyya wa la rasula ba'da amma ba'd. Perkenankan saya menyampaikan dalam bahasa Inggris karena ada teman kita dari UK ya. So before we are discussing a very specific issue regarding governance and financial issues in online learning, let me first saying thank you to Profesor Dr. Sofyan Anif as Director of Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta, and Vice Rectors, Senate, faculty members, and all UMS Universitas Akademika. And let me also express my regards to other speakers, Miss Lynn Biro and Mr. Paul Hopkins from UK. Based on the invitation letter, my session would be focused on governance and financial issues as part of the strategic issue in online learning services. I thought that online learning is becoming a strategic and important issues today for all higher educations. I think not only in Indonesia but also around the world, and also in all level of schooling. Not only in higher education, but also for elementary and secondary school. They are all involved in online learning services. In Indonesia, teaching and learning from home has been regarded as emergency solutions to the rapid spread of corona virus pandemic. Hello, everyone can hear my voice?
Yes, we can hear.
Oh, okay. So just black out in my screen. Okay. The rapid spread of coronavirus pandemic has a significant impact on different sides of our life, including in educations. And so I would like to share my slide, my PowerPoint. My presenters today. So the theme of the discussion is governance and financial issues in online learning. Let me move to second slide. Okay. COVID-19 outbreak has given us a lesson learned that now very important for us to integrate the advancements of information and communication technology in our institutional processes. It seems to me that teaching learning processes in conventional way, I mean face-to-face and classroom-based schema is no longer enough to fulfill our future development. We must adopt and integrate technology in our teaching learning process, as it was mentioned by Prof. Muhammad Nasir here, the Minister of Research Technology and Higher Education in 2015-2019. She said that higher education institution should move forward to online learning, hybrid or blended learning based on the ministry decree for distant learning. And his statement also has been addressed by our ministry, Mr. The Ministry of Culture and Education and Culture. He said that the role of teacher in instructional process would not be able to be replaced by technology. Ya. Namun justru dikuatkan potensinya melalui digitalisasi pendidikan, konsep teknologi bukan untuk menggantikan guru, tapi malah untuk memperkuat potensi guru. So, the use of technology in the teaching learning process has not been designed to replacing teachers, but for strengthening and helping all teachers in enhancing teaching learning process. That's what he said about the importance of technology for our education trend. And has also been addressed by David Kaufman. David Kaufman is a lecturer from Simon Fraser University. He is my supervisor when I took a PhD degree in Simon Fraser. He said that the marriage of computers and with communication technology has provided a significant impact on delivery modes of instruction in distant education, changing from paper-based and correspondence study to web instruction and other kind of online learning program that lead to the possibility of virtual learning environment. The importance of integrating technology in education and referring to the Ministry Education and Culture statement and concerning our situation today, in this semester, we can see that COVID-19 outbreak has pushed all universities moving forward from face-to-face to hybrid and even fully online as a major learning delivery, just like in my university at UT. According to my experience as an academic staff at UT, or Indonesian Open University, there are some different benefits by employing online learning program as one of the learning delivery modes. First, to increase student participation rate. As now, the UT student body is about 320,000 students. In 2011, we have our student body around 650,000 students. It is the first benefit. And the second benefit is to widen student-teacher interaction. Interactions in internal mode available anytime and any place where they are students. And then the third one, promoting student engagement. In online services, we can invite our students and 24 hours, in the morning, in the afternoon, the night, anytime. This is a best practice of online learning in my university. What happened in during the COVID-19 outbreak here, all universities must be involved in a synchronous academic interaction. So actually in our learning services, there are two kinds of academic interaction or teaching learning process. First, deal with synchronous academic interaction. This is real time. Mostly university using Zoom, just like we are today. And in my university, we use Microsoft Teams. But some university also use Google Hangout, YouTube channel, the connect my time this time. And also this is very important for online studying services. Just like in my university, we also provide asynchronous academic interaction. We use open source models as our learning management system, but in different universities, they also use D2L, Desire to Learn, Edmodo, Blackboard, Canvas, and other kind of application developed by their respective universities. This kind of online services is to support our students to have something like self-managed learning or self-directed learning. As we know that in the context of open university, our student has been regarded as distant directed learner. That's what happened in my university. To support these online learning services, also we develop some different services for our student here. For example, we use digital library resources. Also use UT radio, web-based module, multimedia courseware, UT TV, iLecture, online counseling, and different kind of support. This is to provide support for our student, so the student can have different source for to support their learning. Now we move to governance and financial issues for online learning. When we want to develop and implement online services for our student, there are some different issues that we have to be concerned. First things is about ICT system and IT architecture. This is very important. This green design and architecture will have a significant impact on budgeting and procurement and office administration and others. This is what a different kind of function we have to be concerned when we would like to develop online services for our students. In terms of governance here, at UT, for example, there are different units across the department for implementing online services. Of course, we involve faculty members, multimedia production, learning support center, and ICT center. To support the role and function of ICT center here, we employ application and development coordinator. We also employ data processing coordinator and maintenance coordinator. But also, besides that, we have also learning support center to support online services. Learning support center has been regarded as an important unit in my university to coordinate the whole arrangements of online services. This unit has major responsibility in maintaining and improving the implementation of online services under the scrutiny of quality assurance center. So UT also we have pusat jaminan kualitas or quality assurance center to make sure that our policy and online services have been implemented in all units in across department. This is in terms of finance issue, we have also to invest our budget, our money for network architecture. Here the network architecture in my center office at head office Universitas Buka. We have data center on premise at Pondok Cabe, 3 tier total bandwidth, and then data center on cloud, total bandwidth 10 gigabyte per seconds. 2 access point here for the DRC, data recovery center in Batam, in Sumatera, and then Pasar. And also we have also supporting by 5 ESP internet service protocol, ya, Indosat, Moratel, Icon Plus, and Jala Media and HSP. And also we have a virtual private network here, virtual private network VPN to all our regional center supported by Telkom, Indosat, and Icon Plus. So also we have video conference facilities. This is our IT sector and in my head office here. And also this is investment for network architecture in central office, in Pondok Cabe, and also in regional center. This is platform online services, web e-learning UT. So currently we have about 170 students from 320 students. Not all our students, not all distance learners have access to online services because they are in remote islands in the village, in what we call it in 3T, right? In a very isolated area, so it's very difficult for them to get access to the internet. So access point becoming a big issue in my country as a developing country. So also we have developed learning digital learning material, UT TV, UT radio. We also develop massive open courses, open educational resources. We call it Suaka UT, suara untuk apa? In Indonesian terms. We have online learning examinations system. We also develop online proctoring. So for our student in overseas, we don't have to assign someone to get to go abroad for a proctor, but we employ online proctoring for them. So to communicate with our regional offices spread out all over the country, so we develop UT virtual private network here. UT has expended huge money to buy all necessary IT equipment, including invoice for developing virtual private network, supported by Telkom, Indosat, and Icon Plus. UT also use integrated nominating system, monitoring system, integrated monitoring system to make sure our services all work well. So the red color here, for example, tell us that UT server in Lampung here, in Sumatra, getting problem here. Using dashboard here, integrated monitoring system, we can watchdog what happened in our server spread out all the country in 34 provinces. And beside that, also our student distribution spread out all over 42 countries here, and mostly of them in Arab Saudi, in Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea. This is our student spread all over the country. So as open universities, we have a competitive advantage to serve our student not only in Indonesia but also our student outside in overseas. This is our OT online learning services. So the registered student by courses every semester tend to be increased here, as you can see here, starting from 2011 until 2019. So our student to be increased. And this is investment for online historical development starting from in 1995. This is the historical background. We have also just skip this slide. 19, 16. This is governance for learning management. So the yellow color here, this is regarding the student activities, starting from registrations, and there's course material purchase, independent learning. They have a self-study, study group, tutorial services, and examinations. It's conducted by students. And this is different unit across the department to support the student process. This is just like pollution activities, business process in our universities. And this is pollution activities, the whole process about governance in my university, to make sure that all kind of program that is already open under our monitor. So this is the yellow line conducting by regarding the academic management, and then the green box. This is about support services, support activities, and then the blue color, this is regarding the distance learning management. This is the tell us about the governance or peer-led activities or business process in UT as a distance learning institutions. Important factor that in the successful integration of technology in education include the integration of academic and secular planning with faculty development. This is just like what we have to do. We have to be concerned about when we would like to provide learning services for our students. Faculty involvement, terus institutional commitment to the support of faculty, and visionary transformational leadership shown by the top management level, including rector, vice rector as well. The integration of technology into institutional deliveries. The primary purpose of higher education remains the need to deliver quality instruction to learner. So it means that we would like to develop online services for students. We have to be concerned that the primary purpose of higher education is not only the use of technology, but actually the need to deliver quality instruction for our learners. Indonesian researchers found that the innovation of online learning in developing countries such as Indonesia has proved a daunting task. Why? Because you know that in terms of access point in our country, it is very a big issue, and the other side also about computer internet literacy level also is of our student is also a big issue. There are students, distant learner in our country is a very what we call it gagap technology or very low in terms of computer and internet literacy level. Careful planning and systematic design approach are essential to make sure that the needs of the student are continuously being met in a changing environment. To make sure that we can deliver online services in a good way, so we have to equip ourselves with internal quality assurance system. Like in UT, we have adopting ASEAN of Open University Quality Assurance Framework here, containing 10 different areas, including policy and planning, terus human resources, internal management, learning and learner profiles, program design and development, process science, etc. We also must invite external quality review and accreditation, including national accreditation body here, and also we are voluntarily invite International Council for Open and Distance Education to review our quality here, and also we are involving quality assurance agencies, ISO quality assurance agencies in our countries, like say Global, SGS, and Surakarta. This is a reflection for during and after COVID-19 for a new normal era. This is increasing concern for quality of online services, strategic priority of online learning for every universities, and demand for enhancing internet literacy skill and commitment to increasing access, especially in remote islands, in remote area. And thank you very much. Back to the moderator.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Professor Ojat Darajat. That's exactly less than 30 minutes. Thank you very much. That's very in time. Professor Ojat Darajat has given very wide introduction to how Universitas Terbuka or Siti in Indonesia experience the online learning from maybe more than 20 years ago till now, and it's still growing, and how to manage the very, I think, very massive number of students, more than 300,000 students. That's very big number. And for the second speakers, we will invite to speakers from Hal. But before I will like to introduce them to all the participants. The first one is Linbero is the Associate Dean of the National Faculty of Business, Law and Politics University of Hal. She's worked for a number of years in students from domestic and also international market, and they also international expert on the economics, finance, and management of the public sector and public service. And for the second speaker from University of Hull is Mr. Paul Hopkins. He is a lecturer in Education, Faculty of Arts, Culture and Education, University of Hull, United Kingdom. Paul Hopkins leads a number of master programs, including MA in Pedagogy and PGCSE on primary and PGCSE for secondary program. And all research mostly related to Central European the use of enhanced technology in developing practice and models of learning, including utilizing iPad in higher education program. For Paul Hopkins and also Linbero, time is for you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure to join you today. Obviously, we're joining you from the University of Hull, and I would sincerely like to thank Professor Dr. Muhammadiyah for the invitation, your Honourable Vice-Chancellor, Professor Dr. Sofia Nanif, one of our co-speakers, Professor Dr. Ojat Darajat, and also Dr. Munajat, Dr. Sapatini and Dr. Happy for all the help in setting up and establishing our link with you today. I think there's really quite a bad line, so I'll try and share my screen. Maybe that might make it easier to hear. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, very clear.
Wonderful. So I'd like to talk you through the learning outcomes and quality assurance in online learning, which we have at the University of Hull. We've taken obviously a number of different approaches, given that COVID-19 has brought some very strange times upon us. It's been really quite difficult to adjust to the new normal, and I think we've had to very quickly adopt short, medium and long-term strategies for dealing with this. And Paul and I have split our presentation into two. I'm going to talk very quickly about the higher education leadership perspective as one of the associate deans at that business school. I've obviously been involved in determining the strategy for our university and our school in terms of online learning and how we best meet the needs of our learners. And so I hope to talk to you a little bit about that, while Paul will talk to you more about the quality assurance and learning outcomes aspects, the more detailed aspects of delivering post-COVID education in a digital sense, in a digital world. So I'm currently working from home, as are most of us, and I think that brings with it quite a lot of challenges in terms of virtual leadership. It's not easy to lead and manage a huge amount of staff from home, and I think to ensure our students get the best education, that really is a very big imperative, making sure that we manage to lead while still not being in our buildings. So having that sense of a community, having the sense of a university, even though we're not in the same buildings. And I think that's meant that our world has shifted and our comprehension of that world. Nearly every day, I don't know if you're the same, but I spend most of my days in Zoom or some kind of virtual forum, almost all day in meetings or webinars, and then all evening on emails and writing. And that brings with it challenges because it's very tiring. I don't think things have got easier post-COVID. I think it's got really quite challenging for many staff. So I hope to provide an overview of some of those challenges and how we've dealt with them and created opportunities from them. And of course, you know that we're joined by Paul, who's an expert in digital learning. He's been in a variety of different jobs throughout both primary, secondary education and also in universities, a number of different universities. So I'm sure he'll bring with him a great deal of interesting insight. I started by thinking about what the global challenges for the HE sector as a whole were. And I think certainly in terms of the UK, we've been pushed as a higher education sector into a much more commercially driven model where we're responsible for raising much of our own revenue, either through tuition fees or other sources of income. And so many universities have relied upon student recruitment and increasing student numbers every year in order to financially survive. And what we don't know this year is whether those students will actually join us. Will they join us online? Will they join us face to face? Will there be a blended approach? We know what we're offering. We're offering them a variety of opportunities, but we don't know what they'll take and how many of them will take it. And I think particularly international students may well choose not to come to the UK or may delay their entry or may choose to study online to begin with. And so governments, certainly in the UK government will need to be mindful of the difficult challenges that UK universities are facing in delivering a high quality education whilst suffering from these financial losses. And service delivery models have radically changed. And we need to make sure that we still offer quality. As Dr. Ojat was just saying, there are really a multiplicity of quality assurance mechanisms around the world to ensure that our students get the best experience. But it's very difficult to implement them in a very, very, very short timescale. Yesterday, we had a faculty leadership team in our university. And one of the things we were talking about was the potential for January start dates for students. And at its simplest, that sounds very easy. Oh, yes, we'll offer a January start date. But the practicalities of doing that are actually quite profound in terms of doubling up on teaching resources, changing timetables, realigning learning. And we're having to do this in a very, very short space of time. My concern is that quality assurance mechanisms may not be fully adhered to because of the timescales involved, because we're having to react so quickly. So I do hope, again, that quality assurance bodies recognise the need for more flexibility at the moment. One of the big things that we're facing in the UK is health and safety. We're being put under great pressure, as we should be, to ensure that all of our staff and all of our students are completely safe in their environment. I don't know how much you've learned about what the UK is doing but the approach in the UK tends to be to put people into bubbles. So we'll have a bubble of students with a bubble of a teaching group, and maybe 30 students and 4 members of staff will be in constant contact with each other, but not with other people. And in that way, we can hope to try and keep people safe if there is any outbreak of COVID or anything else. But again, that presents with it timetabling challenges and rationalisation challenges in terms of creating teaching teams. And we need to consider how far online provision should and can go. Do we use it as a short-term measure, or do we now seize this opportunity to build it into everything that we do, short, medium and long term? Do we move to a more online and digital approach, which I think is something that students will really, really appreciate? And certainly if flying is impossible for the next 3 to 12 months, possibly longer, it means that we have no choice but to deliver things digitally. Our government has introduced rules around Tier 4 visa schemes, so students from international countries can study online for a UK higher education degree, and as long as they join us in the UK before April 2021, then they will still be allowed to access the 2-year post-study work visa or the 3-year post-study work visa for PhD students. And that's been very welcome news. That's something that I think many international students will be very happy about. Brexit seems like a long time ago, our exit from Europe. And literally in July now we're finalising the agreement for leaving Europe. That has also caused issues which seemed insurmountable only a year ago, but now seem trivial in comparison to COVID. And I think that demonstrates the multiplicity of challenges that face us in HE on a day-to-day basis. So what kind of changes have we had in our universities? So I've talked about the sector as a whole, but in terms of the university, we moved to online and home working from mid-March, and since then, everyone has worked from home. We're literally just about to start opening up some of our labs and our library, but most university staff are still working from home. Paul and I are at home today, as are all of our leadership team. Our HR departments have had a very difficult task in helping to ensure the health and safety of people working from home. Do they have sufficient computers? Do they have access to the internet? Do they have safe working spaces? How do we stay motivated when maybe you have child caring responsibilities or family responsibilities? So there are lots of challenges around making sure our staff continue to work efficiently and effectively from home. And this has required new management, a new approach to management. So certainly I've adopted my leadership approach. I feel like I've had no choice. I've had to become more adaptive, more flexible, more able to meet people outside of hours, more flexible in terms of sharing phone numbers, sharing personal details, because otherwise it's very difficult to stay in touch with each other. And certainly our marketing, the earlier speaker talked about financial pressures, our marketing and promotion has had to change radically. And our open days and applicant days are all now online, agent fairs, recruitment fairs. So how have we changed our approach to delivery? Well, across the sector in the UK, people have taken very different approaches, but in reality, they've all ended up kind of merging into the same thing. So we had some very early adopters, the very strong Russell groups, Oxford and Cambridge, immediately announced that they would be delivering their lectures online and that they wouldn't be delivering face-to-face. Whereas universities like Bolton immediately said they would deliver everything face-to-face and produced a very good video on YouTube talking about how they would ensure the health and safety of their students and staff And I would recommend having a look at the Bolton University YouTube videos simply for an overview of how you keep students and staff safe in a post-COVID world in a university. And it's not easy with one-way systems, hand sanitizers, face masks, all sorts of plastic barriers between staff and students. It's an interesting watch. But at the end of the day, despite these announcements early on in the cycle, most universities have ended up with the reality of some online and some face-to-face. So in Hull, we'll be delivering online from September. We'll be delivering online from September, and then we'll also be delivering face-to-face as and when the students can join us, whether that's in January or earlier. We'll also have a Teaching Excellence Academy, and they have worked hard to create a pedagogy and a new approach to online delivery for the new academic year. So moving away from the emergency response of what we do to get the students through from March till July graduation, but how we actually create an exciting and innovative programme in the new academic year, which could potentially, the lectures could potentially all be delivered online, at least for the first semester. So all of our staff have either been asked to enrol on a week-long training programme in the use of digital technology in education, or to take a self-directed learning programme in Canvas, including the leadership team. And throughout this week, we've had a very big conference, a learning and teaching conference. Every day there have been speakers from different universities talking about online learning, how we deal with partnership working in the post-COVID world. And tomorrow there is a session on, the whole day is on digital learning and online approaches. So I think we've very quickly adopted a professionalised approach to teaching our teachers. And I think that's very important, that we recognise it isn't just our students that need support and advice and guidance and education, our lecturers need the same. How will we deliver our programme? As I've said, probably the lectures, the big lectures that would have been maybe 200 to 400 students will definitely be delivered by either synchronous or asynchronous online delivery, at least in semester one. But tutorials and workshops, lab work will be done blended or in some form of online workshop, which Paul will talk to you about in a minute. Our virtual learning environment is Canvas. The earlier speakers talked about Blackboard and Moodle and about the VLE infrastructure. Certainly our Canvas site we found to be very, very useful. The big blue button on Canvas allows for very easy synchronous and asynchronous delivery, and we've already used synchronous delivery in our TNE projects in Hong Kong. So we deliver at 3 in the morning to our students in Hong Kong, whereas normally we would have flown out to Hong Kong and actually teach them. And Canvas has very easily allowed us to adapt to that. One big advantage for international students within Canvas is Microsoft Immersive Reader. And that helps students to read text aloud, potentially translate text into different languages. So if you're an Indonesian student and you're struggling with the language of the lecture style, press a button and it will immediately convert it into Bahasa. Similarly, the Chinese students find it very easy when it's converted into Mandarin. And in some ways, this push to online learning and storing everything on the VLE could actually work out to be a huge benefit for the students. So we also, for the graduation in July, we wanted to ensure that the students were not disadvantaged by COVID. And so we amended our assessment criteria. And the aim of that was to make sure that no student was detrimentally affected by the impact of COVID. and we changed all exams to online assessment or coursework, and we implemented a no detriment policy. And the no detriment policy meant that we calculated degree averages both before the middle of March, so everything the students had done up till the middle of March 2020, calculated whether they'd got a first class, a 2-1, a 2-2 or a third. And then we did the same and calculated it up till July. And if the students performed worse between March and June, we ignored that and took the average up till March. And that placed a big relief on students. Students were very relieved that if they'd had to fly home, they weren't able to access recordings properly, they didn't have access to technology, their grades, their final degree classification wasn't affected. And we think that really has helped students. So that's my very quick overview of how I think COVID's impacted the sector and our university. And now I'll pass over to Paul, who'll take you through some more details about the educational aspects.
Okay, thank you. Lynn, can you stop sharing, please?
Sure.
Okay. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to attempt this very badly, hopefully, but Salamat sore.
Thank you.
I think, but
Yeah,
we'll see.
Selamat sore.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now with my slides. Can you see these okay?
Yeah, clear.
Okay, so I just want to talk, I've been asked to talk through some of the process that we've been looking at in terms of this idea of a process model or a student model. And, oh, sorry about that. There we go. I want to build this around a process model for ensuring quality outcomes for students. And you can see here a series of questions that I'm going to talk through in the next about 20 minutes. One thing that we've been looking at, and I think that the COVID process has brought into mind, particularly for those of us who've been working in technology-enhanced learning for a number of years, and online and distance learning, is that many universities, including our own, are now being forced into a model that has been adopted by some for a while. It was nice to hear from the Open University in Indonesia. I used to work for the Open University in the UK, which again, of course, had this model for a considerable number of years. But we think there's a three-stage process. The first is that most institutions are currently in, which is this immediate response. How do we deal with the problems that we're having that have been forced upon us? The second, though, is to use this time to reflect again now on the medium term. What lessons will we learn in this immediate response that can ask us to develop and change our approaches over the next 3 to 6 or possibly the next year as we build in new systems, asking which of these work better or which of these offer new opportunities. And then in the longer term, looking at reworking programs to incorporate these new ideas, which allow for better student experiences and ultimately better student quality. So I'll use that as a framework. So the first question always to start with is, how do we want to teach? So what are existing pedagogic approaches do we use? As Lynn's mentioned and other colleagues have mentioned, most universities will use a lecture process, but also seminars, tutorials, lab work, vocational work. And it's important that we consider how we move these existing pedagogic approaches to an online space. So what kind of experiences do we expect students to have, and how will these move or translate into a virtual space? What resources will these need as we again move from a face-to-face space to a virtual space? And how do we change the experience of the students, keeping in mind the psychology of learning as this moves from a virtual space to a digital space? Lynn's already mentioned this idea of screen fatigue, where spending a long time each day in front of a screen in itself is not a good psychological or physiological thing for students to have to do. So as we move into translation and digital space, I think we need to ask about teaching and assessment and about resources. And what amendments will we need to make in order to let this happen? Some of these are very easy. So the move of a lecture from a physical space, a lecture hall, into a digital space, a Zoom conference or an online conference, is technically a fairly easy process, although there are limitations. As we found earlier with sound quality is a problem in a way that those things don't occur in face-to-face space. Some things are reasonably easy, but will need some adaptation or change. So students working in groups, or students giving presentations, or student activities can be changed into online spaces using virtual learning environments, using discussion fora, using presentation modalities, but these become slightly more complex in how we change our pedagogic approaches. And again, that always needs to be kept into mind. How is the teaching and learning need to change? Some things are much more difficult to move into an online space. Things like laboratory work, or practical activities, or vocational activities for students who need to go out into placements in the workplace. So these we need to consider more complexly. This might be an idea of using blended learning with the restrictions that are put in place, or it might be looking for alternatives. So for example, for laboratory work, we might be looking at using virtual simulations, using augmented or virtual reality. And while these do offer some advantages, for example, health and safety advantages with virtual reality, there are complexities that are built in, not least in the use and necessity of equipment that's needed for those. So we need always to start with a pedagogy and ask how these translate into our digital space, looking for those advantages and disadvantages. And I do think we also need to consider how some things are benefit from moving into digital space. So, whilst keeping in mind the student experience and teaching quality, we can ask about the advantages of moving into digital space. So, things like the opportunity to use recorded lectures, so students have the opportunity to re-watch. Lynn's already mentioned some of the advantages around translation. But the opportunity for a student to be able to pause a lecture, to consider the aspects of that, and then rewind and come back to that, is something that's not possible in the face-to-face space. We find in big lectures, students are reluctant to ask questions within inside a large audience. Students are more likely to ask questions through a chat window or a chat box, particularly if there's some degree of anonymity. That's just one example around that. However, we also need to think of the experiences of students. At the moment, I'm talking to a large group of people, but I'm getting none of the visual or oral clues that I would normally get when lecturing to a large group of people. This makes lecturing a quite different experience. And again, for those of you listening, for the students, it becomes also a different experience. So we need to consider those psychological experiences alongside the other experiences as we're considering this learning model. As you can see from the slide here, there are a number of pedagogic models that we can adapt and you might be used to. So things like synchronous learning and asynchronous learning, flipped learning, where we move the learning, pre-learning beforehand to students and they come to the online or synchronous sessions with their questions and their queries. The question of blended learning, how much learning will take place online and how much may move into a physical space. Whilst at the moment we're being forced into a most online experience, I think over the next 6 to 12 months, as some of the restrictions are lifted in relation to the virus, we will need to start to consider how much of that we want to bring back onto campus and actually how much has worked better in that virtual or online space. Again, Lynn mentioned the questions about time management. We find very much with our part-time students that often negotiating their time is complex, not least in commuting to the university. So again, considering how a mixture of learning will take place there. So in a number of courses that I'm involved with or lead, we're looking at streamed learning alongside face-to-face. So there'll be a physical space for some students who might wish to come into the university, but the lecture will also be streamed live for those students who can't. So again, you form these multiple communities, a mixture of both a virtual community and a physical community at the same time. This will allow students and staff to consider time management in a different kind of way and how that's used. This might mean change in lecturing from lecturers spending less time physically lecturing and more time in discussion fora or in tutorials. Again, the technology allows a range of opportunities in how we manage our time. And finally, of course, the question about resources. Lectures being provided in this format or being pre-recorded, using presentations with voiceovers, using discussion fora, using audio, etc. A range of resources that can be and should be produced, but this will in itself take time for the teaching staff. A whole range of tools have already been mentioned in terms of the virtual learning environments or learning management systems, but also we need to consider what tools will be available. And I think one of these things is to think about these in a range of opportunities. We tend to think of tools as delivery tools. This will be our management system, our content management system, our electronic libraries. And these, whilst they're reasonably easy to organise, again, we have to think about the accessibility issues. Lynn has already mentioned the use of our immersive reader, but there are also questions about screen time and about students having access to resources in audio formats and video formats alongside textual formats. The collaboration tools we use, discussion fora and online meeting rooms can be used. We're using breakout rooms a lot with our virtual learning alongside discussion fora, but even that might have implications for both staff and students, just as something as simple as typing speed if we're expecting students to work in discussion fora, or the complexities of multiple threading inside discussion fora. Assessment tools again will need to be reconsidered and rethought, although the opportunities are not limited just to moving towards online assessment and essay type approaches, but also using presentational techniques and other opportunities as well. I just wanted to highlight one idea here from Stanford, who asked us to consider the nature of bandwidth. And again, it was interesting that the rector from the Open University talked about this nature of bandwidth and accessibility. And Stanford's asked us to consider these four quadrats around the nature of immediacy. Do we want our learning to be synchronous or asynchronous? And about the question of bandwidth, how much access students will need. We're finding already in the UK and with our own students at Hull and wider that bandwidth issues are a considerable question when it comes to home and online learning. Not least because the demands of bandwidth in leisure facilities have increased considerably. I often wish I'd taken out shares in Netflix a few months ago and Zoom, both of which have rocketed in the last few months, not surprisingly. But this does mean, as we know, that in the high bandwidth, we can tend to jump to the idea of doing video lectures, for example, as a replacement for our standard face-to-face lectures. This has a very high demand on bandwidth, not just for the delivery systems inside the institution, but for the receiving systems for students. So synchronous video and audio conferences can be technically more difficult and less reliable. So Stanford suggests that we look at the yellow box more. We look at pre-recorded video, asynchronous discussion, pre-recorded audio, and asynchronous discussions with audio as opportunities to have still high impact, but not so much in terms of immediacy. Or the green box, where we move again to low bandwidth solutions. You can see these kind of ideas, and in the reading list you can have a link here to more of Stanford's ideas. So underpinning then all of this are these questions about barriers, limitations and implications. And I think there are a number of these which challenge us to think about the way that we're delivering quality learning at the moment. The first of these is how we structure, and again Lynn touched on this, the idea of the teaching day. The idea that students will come into the university between the hours of 9 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon, I think is being significantly challenged. We've always had part-time students who access learning at different times, but now there are real opportunities to allow students to self-regulate and be more flexible in their own learning, not least when that's delivered in an asynchronous manner. So students who at the moment might be dealing with the complexities of family or of relations, who need to be isolated or need to be aware of the COVID, can structure and arrange their learning in a different pattern. But I think, again, going forward, we need to think about how we can continue to do that so students have more flexibility in their own learning, possibly attracting then a wider range of students with that opportunities that currently don't exist. And that extends not just the teaching day, but this question of the teaching week and the semester or trimester. We need to look certainly at the way that resources are being provided through virtual learning environments. And again, Lynn mentioned earlier the needs for professional development for staff, but I would argue we also need to think about professional development for our students. Prensky talked about the digital learner or the digital native, but I think it's an error to think that our students coming through, just because they've been used to using technology in their personal lives, are good at using technology for academic learning. Being a digital learner is in itself a complex issue, and our students will need support and training in how to do that. Self-regulation, self-motivation, and metacognition are all key and important parts of that. And as I mentioned earlier, students having access to equipment. We're finding that many of our students now, in fact very few of our students have access to a fixed desktop, and whilst laptops are more common, many of our students only have access to smart devices or to tablets. And the expectation of the activities we might want them to do will again depend on the equipment that's available, or equipment that we as the institution will have to provide in some way. So for example, we are looking at social isolating inside our library buildings and access to students, but that in itself provides complexities. There's going to be a need for, I think, close integration here between the sort of 4 key groups who will be developing these new learning structures that we can continue to ensure this high quality. Academic staff and students obviously sit at the heart of this, and there's a key thing there about the interrelationship and the developing of relationships. One of the things that I think we're all concerned of for September is how academic staff will develop good working relationships, professional relationships with their students when there isn't that face-to-face contact. And again, we're looking at things about students posting personal biogs, on using systems like Padlet, on students having more tutorial space and one-to-one tutorial space. But the development of those key relationships will be important. And again, the psychology of learning and the psychology of teaching digitally will be important to support both academic and student staff. But if we are talking about changing structures, administrative staff, and of course underpinning that technology staff will also become very important. And the key interrelationships there will be very vital to developing these changing online learning systems. Not least, I think, and Lynn used this word, is flexibility, is to recognise that things may change quickly and rapidly, and we'll have to respond to that, perhaps much more quickly than institutions, particularly higher education institutions, are good at normally responding. And as I mentioned again, those key relationships, developing online relationships are quite different. Research at the Open University in the UK found that there was significant change after the first time we ran study weekends or study days where students met face-to-face. That changed their online relationships, and a crafts work's very important in this area. If we look at this in terms of developing relationships online, that will be complex, particularly if we're a fully online modality. So to finish off just this very quick sketch through this 5-stage model that I've been proposing for online learning, I just want to give you a case study of something we've been doing for my own education students. These are students who are training to be teachers in the primary or the secondary sector. So we've looked at how we can adapt and change our key lectures and seminars And we are moving here towards a more online process, both synchronous and asynchronous. But we're also considering how we structure the day, keeping in mind that idea of too much screen time or too much computer time. So we're starting to ask the questions about how can the home for the students be adapted into a learning environment. One of these, for example, might be what opportunities are there for students to do practical or laboratory type work in their own home. And there are obviously some severe limitations there, but there are ways of offering opportunities for this to happen. And then finally, we're thinking for these teaching students who would normally spend time in schools, what opportunities are there for extending a virtuality of that vocational or placement experience? So we're looking at providing streamed video from school classrooms for students to reflect on, an augmented reality experience, at 360 video experience, so students can have immersive practice in a virtual space as well as a real space. However, what we've realized underpinning all of this, as I mentioned before, we're developing those relationships between the individual academic and their mentor or tutor group. So we're going to spend a lot of time working in these bubbles of 5 or 6 students who themselves will develop close relationships with a personal tutor. We think the personal tutor role may be more important this year than it's ever been before. Okay, I want to leave some time, if there are time, for questions. So that's just a very quick scoot round these ideas. And I'm going to pass back to Lynn now, who's just got a couple more things to say. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Paul. Could you just continue the slides?
I can.
Thank you. So I think what we wanted to end on was that university life continues. It doesn't matter that our buildings are closed, and I think something that COVID has most definitely taught me is that a university breathes for its staff and its students. And much as we invest a huge amount of money in buildings, for the benefit of students, it isn't those buildings that's important. It's us here today learning from each other, talking to each other. It's our students coming together in a community of practice. It's our strength of our partnerships. And so I think, we really can learn a great deal from COVID. And hopefully by having a range of materials accessible digitally and online, we will improve the experience for students going forward. It may have been a baptism of fire. COVID may not have been something that we anticipated or wanted or even want to continue. But as all good educators, we should continue to learn. Our process, our whole life should be about a continual learning process. And that brings me on to skills workshops, webinars, all of the things that we're continuing to provide for students and partners. Every week, at least once a week, I do a webinar like this for an international audience. Every week I do a similar one for partnership students, our study abroad students. And on our VLE, in our electronic library resources, there are huge handbooks and skills packages, all sorts of things for our students to learn from, and I direct our students to them all the time. So I think we've really enhanced our offer, enhanced what we do, and going back to hopefully another kind of new normal once COVID settles down. Hopefully we get a vaccine, perhaps more people, will be immune. Maybe life will resume more as it was before. But I hope that we still bring with us all the things that we've learned and all the skills and technologies and digital enhancements with us into that new future. So thank you very much for listening to Paul and I. Paul has very kindly provided a set of references. Please do feel free to look at those references after this webinar. If you do want to email either of us, on the last slide we also have our contact details, which include my email address, Paul's email address, and our WeChat details. So we'll leave that with you and my WhatsApp number. we'll leave that with you, and thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you for taking the time to listen to us.
Okay, thank you very much for delivering very interesting presentation that give us insight how the university in the United Kingdom has overcome the problem about the COVID-19, especially for online learning. And we can show how the University of Hull still ongoing how to overcome this. The world is changed, and also we have to change forward from face-to-face or traditional learning to maybe fully online learning. And to all participants, we still have about 25 minutes before this end. And we open for discussion, question and answer. Please, if anyone has a question, you can chat through the participant, or you can raise hand and we can unmute. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I can see that there are some question for the speakers. For the first one, maybe I'll read it. The first one is, are there any differences in terms of challenges in holding online courses before and after COVID-19 outbreak? How does our university cope with that? The second one, has the online learning affected the students' tuition fee after COVID-19? I think this question related to Lynn and Paul. And I also has a very specific question for Pak Ojad Darojat, is especially for the Universitas Terbuka. Yeah, this about how to overcome for the network connection, especially in remote area, because we know in Indonesia, not all of our area has a good connection, especially in internet connection. However, we know also that Universitas Terbuka has also UT Radio. And the second one is about how to anticipate the student to complete their tasks, especially if there's cheating in copy and paste, and etc. And the third one is how to upgrade, how to enhance the facility, especially for the docent lecture ability in manage teaching and learning process. And the fourth one is how to assess capaian pembelajaran mata kuliah or learning outcome, and also program learning outcome or children in the Universitas Terbuka. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's. Yeah.
Can I answer the first question briefly? Is one of the things we are most concerned about is that normally students who are signing up for an online course before COVID-19 knew they were signing up for an online course. So the students, so for example, if you worked for the Open University, you knew that most of your learning was going to be online or perhaps a little bit of blended. Our students who signed up for coming to the University of Hull or any university in England, when they made that offer, and this would have been 6 to 12 months ago, would have expected a normal university experience. And that normal experience would have been on campus, in lecture halls, and also, I think, very importantly, the social side. So in the student union, in the sports club, in the dance hall, all the experiences that students expect. Suddenly they're being offered something quite different, which they didn't choose to or hadn't chosen to do. So that psychological aspect of the ways they were expecting to learn and the ways they will be learning is something I think we're going to have to manage very carefully, even if this is, hopefully, only for a short period. But I think I'll come back to that three-stage model I proposed, is I do think it's important that we reflect on the positive experiences of online over the next 3 to 4 months, and reflect back on the things that we've had to do in the last 3 months, and say, which of those benefits actually can we take forward as we move students back to that experience perhaps they're expecting. So I say that's the biggest difference between online courses before COVID, students were expecting to work in that way, and online courses now and in the future, where students perhaps are having to adapt, and indeed staff are having to adapt to this, as Lynn called it, the new normal.
Thanks,
Before the
Paul.
second question, yeah.
One example I would give is that we currently offer we currently offer flying faculty EMBAs in a variety of different locations around the world. So, for example, our staff currently fly to Hong Kong to deliver an EMBA, or they may fly to Romania or India or Finland. And we'd always wanted to create an online MBA, but there were always hurdles in the way, and everyone seemed to think it was a hugely difficult task. Having been thrust into having to deliver that online experience immediately because of COVID, it's become very clear that we could very easily create an online MBA. We do recognise that delivering an emergency online lecture is not the same as creating an online programme. And I think that's the thing that Paul is drawing attention to, that our emergency response, the fast response to recording lectures and putting them on Canvas and making sure students aren't detrimentally affected, is not the same as creating a very valuable, specifically designed online programme that brings its own unique rewards. And I think we've been given a very exceptional opportunity to learn from our emergency response and at the same time develop programs that really will meet the needs of future learners. One thing we've been talking about is the use of mobile technology. So some universities use a system called Aula, which is everything, all of your lectures, all of your recordings, all of your interactions with staff can all be done on a mobile phone. That immediately gets rid of any issues around connectivity, broadband width, anything. As long as you've got a phone signal, a mobile signal, you can access everything. And so I think it's those kind of changes, those responses that we need to make to recognise that students nowadays are different. Almost every student wakes up whenever they wake up, and immediately they pick up the phone. And the rest of the day, the phone is with them from the minute they wake up till the minute they go to sleep. Why are we not harnessing that technology? Why are we not using that to deliver an education that's meaningful to students? And so it's those kind of difficult questions that we've got to grapple with and come up with an answer very quickly. Because if the post-COVID world continues in the way it is for the next, say, 2 years, and flying is still impossible, students will still want an international education. Students will want an Indonesian education, they'll want a UK education, and we need to find flexible ways of delivering that in a medium that works and overcomes all of the challenges. So I think there's a lot to do and a lot to learn, and I think that's what we're doing right now. The second question was about tuition fees. We haven't adapted our tuition fees because, as far as we're concerned, the product we're delivering is exactly the same if not a higher quality product than before. We're giving students the flexibility to join us whenever they want. So although a student may start with online delivery in September, if they then feel comfortable to fly in October, they can join us in October. So the fee is still the same, certainly for this year. If we move to creating bespoke online programs where the program is different and doesn't involve as much face-to-face connection or contact time, or doesn't involve as much lab work, then I'm sure that tuition fees will begin to change. But in the UK, it's very, very difficult. The climate is very difficult. The government has made it so market-driven and so competitive that universities have to charge a fee, the fees that they're currently charging, in order to just simply cover the costs. So we don't have any scope to reduce fees unless we reduce our cost base and we become more efficient. So that's what we'll have to work on over the next year, changing the cost base, changing the structure of programs to make the fees different if that's what's required. One thing we have done is we're about to announce a £3,000 scholarship for our undergraduate students who've completed with us this year and are continuing into a master's degree next year. So if we've got the students we've got graduating with us right now, will get £3,000 automatically taken off the MSc fee for next year. And I think that was something we could do immediately to help support students who maybe aren't able to fly home, have got difficulties because of COVID, but we couldn't extend that to the whole market. We do have a range of other scholarships, MSc scholarships, and undergraduate scholarships, but they're no different. They are as they stand at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. I think that's enough.
I don't know if anybody has any other questions. I've seen a few on the chat, so I can answer those on the chat if you want to move to another speaker. Or would you like us to continue?
Is there still any question?
I think you had some in Bahasa for the next speaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we can.
Do you want to address the first one, Paul? Because I think that falls more.
Learning often comes through discussion, through debate, through argument, and that just becomes not impossible, but quite different online. So often it's much slower. So most of the conversations we'll have will be, as we're doing now, will be synchronous. One person will talk, the next person will talk. Whilst our students, to some degree, will be used to asynchronous conversations through their social media feeds, through things like Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, etc., that again becomes quite a different thing. And it's difficult to hold the kind of ideas in your head over that longer term. There's also differences between just the sheer psychology of sitting and looking at a screen without, again, those cues and feedbacks that we're used to in communication. A lot of communication is the facial, is the quality of sound, is the feedback that we get between individuals. So learning through a screen, I'm talking now, and it's, I don't get any of those feedback stimulus that I'm used to when lecturing to a group of students or in a seminar or in a laboratory. There's also, however, there are many positives, as I mentioned a couple earlier, around the opportunity for the student to more self-manage and structure their learning, for the opportunities to replay lectures, to revisit things they might find complex or difficult, the opportunities to pose questions where they can have time to think and reflect, rather than having to pose a question quite quickly, as the lecturer says, "Are there any questions?" as you've been asked now. So there are significant differences, but what we need to consider is how we can look for the positives of those as much as possible and develop those, and to moderate or to mediate the negatives for the students. I do think some of that will be about forming, so we're thinking a lot about these idea of bubbles, about getting students themselves into small study groups where they can support and develop themselves. This also is an important developmental skill for longer term, because all of us, as we move into the workplace, will have to work with colleagues and such like. So yes, I think the simple answer is yes, there are significant differences. We need to consider how we can best deal with those.
And I think that links to the last question about motivation. Yes, it is very difficult to energize and motivate a class in a virtual environment. And I think that's why we have to really radically change our delivery style. Certainly I found that keeping the interest of a group of students for more than 10 to 15 minutes in a virtual environment, if you're not doing something proactive, that they're involved in problem solving or questions or case studies, it's almost impossible. Going back to what I was saying about the mobile phone, students, as we know, are used to an instant answer to anything. They can sit on their mobile phone while they're in a Zoom with you and type out something and just get the answer to any question they want on their mobile phone. So why do they want us to answer that question? It makes no difference to them whether we answer it or Google answers it on their phone. The only thing that makes difference is contextualization. So our knowledge of life, of the world, of case studies, of all of our experiences, those are the things that we as lecturers can bring to motivate students. And we need to do it in such a way that we recognise the needs of those learners and not only have the needs of our young learners, Generation Z and Y, change dramatically, but also delivering in a virtual world is completely different to delivering in the real world. I am very much a people person. I feel close to people, I enjoy being with people, I enjoy interacting with people, and I find, as Paul has said, that in Zoom you get none of that. It's really difficult. You can't read people properly, you don't get that sense of warmth, you can't reassure people the same way. So I think we've all got quite a long way to go in terms of learning how to adjust our delivery. Certainly I think the quickest way is to make the classes or sessions as experiential as possible, both from you talking about your experiences, using case studies, using problems, using practical questions. I don't think it's the medium that matters. It doesn't matter whether you're using Zoom or Teams or Skype. What matters is how you're doing it and how quickly you're doing it and how you're keeping the interest of the audience. And so I think, to answer the second question about learning outcomes, as yet, we're still working with the same programme specifications. We haven't had time to change our programme specifications with the programme outcomes and the learning outcomes. And so we're having to deliver those outcomes to make sure those students reach those outcomes in a completely different way. And that's really a concern from a quality assurance perspective. So I think all universities over the next year will have to relook at their programme specifications, reconsider their learning outcomes, and see if they can adapt them to this new mode of delivery. A lot of it depends on how long lasting this change is. Will we just go back to the old normal as soon as we can? That's the question that none of us know the answer to. I suspect not. I suspect that students, having got used to not having to commute to the university, not having to leave the bedroom to study, will probably quite like it, as will a lot of staff. And so I think we will have to adjust medium to long term our programme specifications. And at Hull, we're creating something called a competency-based framework, which is a very fancy way of saying, rather than assessing ticking off learning outcomes as such in terms of tasks and understanding, we'll be assessing whether a student can do something. And the aim is to only address whether the student can do it once. So, for example, I'm an accounting and finance lecturer. One skill for accounting and finance students is to be able to create an income statement. And what tends to happen in the current method of education is that students are assessed on that skill 2 or 3 times across the course of their lifetime studying with us on 1 degree programme. So different lecturers will assess that skill in their modules in slightly different ways. The idea of a competency-based framework is that you only ever assess it once. Once you know a student can create an income statement and read it, you don't assess that again. And the idea is that stops students being bored and it helps to increase motivation. So I think all of these things are very, very interlinked. These 3 questions here are very insightful questions because they're all part of the same equation.
Just to add very quickly Eric Mazur's work on flipped learning, because Eric Mazur again asked these questions anyway for a face-to-face classroom, which is what things do we as lecturers deliver, and Lynn's touched on this now, that actually the students can read and learn in their own time at their own pace. So again, pre-recorded lecture, curated materials. Whilst I agree with Lynn that students have access to online, I think our job as lecturers needs to move more to this idea of curators, providing them with the best materials, the best opportunities. And then the actual synchronous time is spent much more where students can drive the learning, ask the questions, offer solutions, do activities. So delivery as students, I think delivery by lecturers should move more to asynchronous space, and interactivity should be considered in synchronous space as we look at these online options.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. That's very clear and a complete answer.
Saya bisa menjawab pertanyaan ini?
Ya, silakan Pak. Ya, silakan Pak.
Can answer this question? So?
Ya, ya.
Oke. Baik, Munajat dan kawan-kawan.
Ya.
Saya akan coba memberikan respon terhadap 4 pertanyaan ini. Yang pertama, bagaimana mengatasi kendala jaringan koneksi di wilayah mahasiswa sehingga mahasiswa tidak bisa mengikuti proses Pabelan secara maksimal. Memang betul Pak, salah satu isu utama yang dihadapi oleh UT ketika kita ingin memberikan layanan secara online adalah ketiadaan akses jaringan di daerah-daerah terpencil, di daerah 3T, daerah perbatasan, gitu, terdepan, tertinggal. Sehingga mereka tidak bisa memanfaatkan layanan online services kita. Nah, untuk mahasiswa yang seperti itu yang ada di perbatasan, karena misi UT adalah adanya pemerataan akses pendidikan tinggi bagi seluruh warga masyarakat, maka kita menyediakan layanan bantuan belajar yang lain. Kita ingat bahwa online learning hanya merupakan salah satu learning delivery mode. Hanya merupakan salah satu cara penyampaian pembelajaran kepada mahasiswa, tapi masih ada cara-cara yang lain yang bisa digunakan, yang bisa dilakukan oleh UT sebagai institusi pendidikan terbuka dan jarak jauh. Nah, dalam konteks pendidikan jarak jauh, learning delivery kepada mahasiswa bisa dilakukan yang pertama dengan melalui bahan ajar, bahan learning material yang oleh kita disiapkan secara khusus. Learning material yang disiapkan untuk distance learner berbeda dengan bahan ajar atau buku yang dijual di Gramedia, dijual di Gunung Agung. Tapi bahan ajar kita dikemas printed learning material atau digital learning material yang kita kembangkan for distance learner, kita menyebut sebagai self-contained learning material. self-contained learning material atau self-explanatory power learning material. Artinya apa? Learning material itu, bahan ajar itu, atau buku itu berisi seluruh komponen, berisi seluruh informasi yang dibutuhkan oleh mahasiswa untuk memahami bahan ajar itu. Jadi mahasiswa yang ada di daerah terpencil tadi tidak membutuhkan dosen lagi, tidak membutuhkan orang lain untuk bertanya, untuk memahami isi modul itu. Karena seluruh informasi yang dibutuhkan untuk memahami bahan ajar itu semuanya sudah tersedia di sana. Self-contained learning material. Kalau ada konsep, ada teori yang perlu contoh, maka contoh dan non-contohnya ada di sana. Kalau teori atau konsep itu perlu gambar, gambarnya ada di sana. Kalau misalnya ada kata-kata yang sulit dipahami, maka daftar senerai penjelasan kata sulit itu juga ada di sana. Semua informasi yang dibutuhkan oleh mahasiswa untuk memahami bahan ajar itu semuanya sudah ada di sana. Makanya bahan ajar atau modul UT disebut sebagai self-explanatory power. Artinya buku yang dapat menjelaskan sendiri kepada para pembahasannya, kepada para pembacanya. Nah, jadi ada bahan ajar yang kita kembangkan untuk mahasiswa jarak jauh. Agar mereka bisa mengikuti belajar di UT dengan baik walaupun tidak ada koneksi internet. Nah, yang berikutnya dalam konteks jarak jauh juga itu tidak haram kita menyelenggarakan kegiatan tatap muka. Tetapi tatap muka yang kita desain dalam konteks pendidikan jarak jauh berbeda dengan tatap muka yang dilaksanakan di perguruan tinggi konvensional. Kalau tatap muka yang dilaksanakan konvensional itu kan mereka datang ke kelas pada jam tertentu gitu kan, ada dosennya dan dosennya membimbing mahasiswa itu memahami isi pelajaran gitu kan, memberikan ilmu yang dimilikinya kepada mahasiswa, itulah gitu kan disebut tempatnya. Dalam konteks jarak jauh mahasiswa itu memanfaatkan kegiatan tutorial tatap muka sebagai tempat bagi mereka untuk memecahkan persoalan-persoalan, konsep-konsep atau teori yang sulit dipahami. Karena jumlah pertemuan dalam konteks jarak jauh itu hanya maksimum itu 8 pertemuan. Di UT itu 8 pertemuan, kalau di konvensional ada 16. Di UT kita buat 8 pertemuan dalam satu semester. Di Malaysia, di OUM dulu awalnya 8 sama dengan kita karena OUM belajar dari kita, Open University of Malay. Nah, terus dirubah dari 8 menjadi 6. Sekarang dia menjadi hanya 4 pertemuan dalam satu semester yang untuk face-to-face tutorial sessions. Di Surakarta Tamatirat Open University di Thailand, dalam satu semester mereka ada 3 pertemuan di mana profesornya datang berkunjung ke regional offices gitu kan. Nah, itu beda-beda. Tapi tidak haram dan boleh gitu kan. Tapi memang konteks dan tujuan penyelenggaraan tatap muka face-to-face tutorial services itu berbeda dengan itu yang pertama. Jadi itu untuk memberikan kesempatan kepada mahasiswa yang tidak punya akses ke jaringan untuk bisa belajar secara baik. Dan di situ juga tetap oleh kita mahasiswa seperti itu, Bapak, kita ikutkan juga mengerjakan tugas-tugas mata kuliah. Tugas mata kuliah ini sangat penting gitu agar mereka dikawal learning progress-nya oleh kita di setiap tahap. Dan dalam setiap tugas itu juga ada feedback yang kita berikan. Nah, feedback itulah yang akan menjembatani antara capaian pembelajaran mereka dengan kompetensi yang harus diperoleh ketika mereka menempuh satu mata kuliah. Nah, jadi feedback dalam konteks jarak jauh itu menjadi sangat penting karena itu akan memotivasi mereka untuk mencapai capaian pembelajaran yang diharapkan dari suatu mata kuliah. Nah, ini akan terkait dengan pertanyaan yang berikutnya. Bagaimana mengantisipasi mahasiswa dalam menyelesaikan tugas ujian dan lain-lain tidak melakukan kecurangan dalam bentuk copy paste pekerjaan temannya. Ini tentu sangat kita perhatikan gitu kan. Yang pertama untuk tugas-tugas mata kuliah termasuk ujian yang kita berikan, ada satu hal yang mungkin perlu saya sampaikan bahwa dalam konteks jarak jauh UT itu awalnya memang kita hanya bisa mengembangkan ujian secara konvensional, tradisional gitu kan, ujian di mana mahasiswa ujian berkumpul di ruangan-ruangan ujian, nanti ada proktornya, pengawas ruang datang ke sana dan diujian di sana gitu proses ujian. Nah, tapi dalam konteks yang lebih modern dengan mengintegrasikan teknologi, kita sudah mengembangkan yang namanya sistem ujian online. ujian online examination system. Nah, dalam online examination system ini gitu di sana kita memanfaatkan virtual private network yang sudah kita punya dengan seluruh regional offices di seluruh Indonesia. Pada perkembangan berikutnya kan UT tidak hanya bisa melalui ujian dengan menggunakan virtual private network yang ada di kantor-kantor cabang, di UPBJJ, di regional offices, tapi juga kita menyediakan layanan ujian itu di kabupaten kota, yang penting di situ ada akses ke jaringan. Maka ujian online-nya itu sekarang sudah berbasis web, sehingga bisa dilaksanakan di kapan saja, di mana saja, gitu ya. Nah, terus yang terakhir, perkembangan terakhir, kita juga telah melakukan breakthrough dalam online ujian ini, di mana kita mengembangkan yang namanya online proctoring. Jadi online examination system based web based dan equipped by online proctoring. Nah, dengan online proctoring ini maka kita tidak perlu lagi meng-assign proctor-proctor datang ke ruangan ujian, karena diawasi oleh mesin gitu ya. Nah, bagaimana untuk memastikan mereka tidak melakukan kecurangan dalam ujian? Nah, dalam online proctoring mesin ini, itu yang namanya bayangan yang bergerak, suara yang terdengar, itu semuanya oleh kita bisa dipantau. Termasuk gerakan bola mata bisa dipantau. Nah, ketika mereka melakukan kecurangan dalam ujian, maka nanti ada kotak berwarna kuning menyala. Nah, artinya mahasiswa tersebut, peserta ujian tersebut terindikasi melakukan kecurangan dalam ujian. Seperti itu. Itu bisa dipantau oleh kita. Nah, termasuk juga untuk memastikan bahwa ujian itu adalah mahasiswa kita, peserta ujian yang seharusnya bukan dibantu oleh Pak Lurah, Pak RT, Pak RW, atau istrinya, atau suaminya, atau anaknya di sana kuliah, maka di dalam online proctoring mesin itu juga ada face recognition application, sehingga nanti dengan aplikasi pengenal wajah itu bisa kelihatan apakah orang peserta ujian itu sesuai dengan yang ada dalam database student record system kita atau tidak. Itu bisa dipantau. Kalau tidak, langsung ditolak atau berwarna kuning seperti itu. Nah, terus juga dari saya itu untuk yang tugas-tugas dikerjakan oleh mahasiswa, maka tutor-tutor kita, teman-teman kita di fakultas dilengkapi dengan aplikasi yang bisa digunakan oleh mereka untuk memantau kemiripan plagiarisme. Jadi memang kita juga sangat ketat terkait dengan plagiarisme itu, bahwa teman-teman punya akses, ada beberapa aplikasi untuk mendeteksi plagiarisme yang kita gunakan. Saya tidak akan menyebutkan produknya, tapi ada 3, dan itu yang kita gunakan selama ini. Sehingga ketika ada mahasiswa yang terindikasi melakukan kecurangan, itu mereka kena sanksi akademik. Seperti contohnya yang kita lakukan dalam ketentuan kita dalam ujian, kalau ketahuan ada mahasiswa contek-mencontek, itu bukan hanya yang menconteknya aja yang dinyatakan gagal ujian mata kuliah tersebut, tapi termasuk yang diconteknya pun oleh kita diberikan hukuman gagal. Jadi kita sangat ketat gitu kan dalam pelaksanaan ujian. Jadi kalau ada mahasiswa terindikasi memberikan ataupun diberi gitu melakukan kecurangan ujian, nyontek, maka oleh kita kedua-duanya, ketiganya, keempatnya, kalau ternyata semuanya kelompok itu diberikan hukuman. Tidak ada ampun, Pak. Itu yang kita lakukan, dan itu mesin scanning kita bisa mendeteksi, termasuk juga mahasiswa yang melaksanakan kecurangan untuk soal-soal objective test. Soal scanning kita bisa mendeteksi gitu kan siapa mahasiswa yang melakukan kecurangan ketika mereka menjawab dalam lembar jawaban ujian LJU yang ABCD, itu bisa dideteksi, Pak. Gitu. Bagaimana mengupgrade, memfasilitasi, dan menstandarisasi kemampuan dosen dalam mengolah PBM secara daring. Ya, memang secara reguler kita melakukan pembekalan pelatihan kepada dosen-dosen, bahkan bukan hanya dosen-dosen UT yang ditunjuk oleh kita untuk menyelenggarakan daring, tetapi juga dosen-dosen dari luar. Saya yakin juga mungkin dari UMS juga ada beberapa orang yang kita minta bantuan untuk membantu pelaksanaan tutorial tatap muka atau tutorial online yang kita lakukan selama ini. Karena memang untuk kegiatan tutorial, Pak, kita banyak meminta bantuan kepada para dosen yang ada di perguruan tinggi yang lain, karena memang dosen UT tidak mencukupi. Dan oleh kita bahkan untuk tatap muka, dosen UT dilarang untuk memberikan layanan tatap muka. Kita hanya sebagai memberikan kesempatan kepada dosen-dosen tempat lain. Bagaimana asesmen CPMK dan CPL yang telah dilakukan UT sehingga mahasiswa dinyatakan lulus jenjang studi yang ditempuh. Nah, saya kasih contoh satu saja, misalnya di program PGSD Pak, di samping mereka setelah teruji learning outcome-nya dari setiap mata kuliah, maka di ujung program mereka untuk yang misalnya program PGSD, mereka itu melakukan dua hal. Yang pertama, dia melakukan tugas akhir program, Pak. Tugas akhir program itu, gitu kan, itu merupakan representasi dari kegiatan peningkatan profesional mereka di bidang guru untuk PGSD, di mana mereka harus membuat laporan tugas akhir program itu berdasarkan classroom research base atau kita menyebutnya PTK, penelitian tindakan kelas. Nah, jadi mereka harus membuat karya ilmiah classroom research penelitian berdasarkan penelitian tindakan kelas. Nah, itu dibimbing selama 1 tahun gitu kan, diambil pada semester sebelumnya, dan itu dilakukan oleh mereka dan nanti diuji hasilnya gitu ya, dilihat. Nah, itu dari sisi kemampuan dalam hal kognitifnya, teorinya gitu ya, dalam artinya knowledge-nya. Nah, terus dari sisi performan unjuk kerja, mereka juga oleh kita diuji dari sisi prakteknya di depan kelas nyata. Di depan kelas nyata mereka ujian di sekolah-sekolah mana kita tempatkan, kita desain gitu ya, di mana oleh kita ada alat-alat penilaian, instrumen yang kita gunakan untuk menguji performa mereka, unjuk kerja mereka bagaimana ketika mereka mengajar depan kelas. Nah, jadi kita lakukan ini duanya sebagai muara akhir program yang kita lakukan untuk menguji apakah mahasiswa itu sudah layak lulus jenjang studi yang mereka tempuh. Seperti itu, Pak. Itu respon saya atas 4 pertanyaan yang disampaikan. Terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Ojat atas jawabannya. Cukup menjelaskan bagaimana proses yang sudah dijalani oleh Universitas Terbuka dalam melakukan sejak dari mungkin pembelajarannya sampai kemudian asesmennya sampai mahasiswa lulus, bahwa kemudian kualitas outcome-nya memang dapat dipertanggungjawabkan secara baik. Oke, sepertinya ini kalau melihat waktu kita sudah melewati waktu yang ditetapkan oleh panitia, karena sudah melewati jam 3. Maka ini mungkin untuk tanya jawab saya akhiri, kemudian kita beralih ke ketiga yaitu adalah ini namun sebelum menutup mungkin akan sedikit saya simpulkan dari hasil webinar hari ini bahwa pada dasarnya dunia pendidikan tinggi terutama harus berubah kondisi yang ada sekarang tidak belajar di atas menggunakan face-to-face education, sudah mulai menggunakan online learning, ada yang sampai fully learning system pakai via, kemudian ada banyak tantangan dan juga hambatan dan juga yang kemudian itu harus diselesaikan baik oleh student sendiri maupun juga nanti oleh penyelenggara maupun kemudian oleh dosen. Tapi kita juga sangat dimudahkan karena sekarang teknologi membuat apa yang kemudian dulunya sangat susah sekarang menjadi lebih mudah. Ada banyak aplikasi, ada banyak teknologi, bahkan tadi juga Pak Ojat sudah sampaikan untuk ujian saja supaya tidak nyontek sekarang sudah ada teknologinya, sehingga menjadi lebih mudah untuk menjamin bahwa kualitas yang dihasilkan dari pendidikan daring itu akan sama dengan pendidikan yang dilakukan secara konvensional, yaitu face to face. Demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan pada kesempatan hari ini. Saya selaku pembawa acara mohon maaf jika ada banyak salah dalam memimpin kesempatan webinar kali ini. Saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada seluruh partisipan dan juga kepada narasumber, kepada Prof. Ojat Darojat, and also for our speaker from University of Hali. We give high appreciation for them and for the appreciation for our speaker. Maybe we can unmute our speaker and give them applause together. Mungkin bisa di-unmute dulu dan kita bisa tepuk tangan bersama untuk seluruh pembicara kita.